You're listening to Around Comics. 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 Comics.
You are listening to Around Comics, episode 448. Is that right? 448? I think that's right.
All right.
I'm Brian. You're Christopher Niesman. This is Around Comics. It's Thursday night. We're live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitch and Twitter and all those spaces. And tonight we are talking about Marshal Law. The comic
I am the law.
I am the law. No, that's the terrible.
Oh, that's the other guy. That's the other guy.
Sylvester Stallone. Yeah. No, it's Marshal Law by Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill. First published by Epic Comics in 1987. This series is known for its dark humor, over-the-top violence, and its irreverent take on the superhero genre. This was my Trade Talks pick, and I'm really excited to see what you and Tom, whenever Tom shows up, have to say about it. He'll be here. Tom's
dealing with the children's.
Yeah, his last text was running late, everyone's crying. That's he's sort of a single dad tonight. So he's dealing with his children. Everyone's crying. Yeah, I know how that goes. I've been there. But what's up, man? How you doing?
I'm really angry about this. I had a huge blind spot in my comic book reading history, and this is a book that like 17-year-old Chris would have just poured over these pages, and it was a blind spot for me. And I'm reading this and I'm just like, holy shit, this is so good now. This would have been amazing in 1987, 1988. It was probably a little too subversive for my fragile being in 1987.
Well, where were you at in 1987? Were you in Southern Illinois?
Well, yeah, I would have been in Marion. I would have been in 8th grade, probably going into high school. I was 88 to 91.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been a tough thing for you to even find at that time,
Yeah.
I think. Like I was 87, I was 16.
I went to Carbondale was a college town, and so there was, it wasn't like a lot of like rural areas. There was a SIU Carbondale is there, so it was a big university town, and it was a pretty cool comic shop. And I know that they had a lot of indie comics that I just, as a 16-year-old, redneck, I wasn't looking for that. DKR was probably about as far as I went into anything like off of the mainstream at that point. And that's a Batman story, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I didn't mean that as much as although, it was an epic book when it came out, which is interesting. And there's an interesting story about that I watched an interview with Pat Mills talking about sort of the creation of this and how it came to fruition, and it's interesting how it sort of happened. But no, I just meant like, at 8 years old, or no, you didn't. Yeah,
no, I was like,
grade.
8th grade. I was like, 14, 15, 14, probably.
Yeah.
It was
your parents would not have approved. I know. I was 16, and I remember picking this up on the stands, and it was something that, I was at that period in my life of reading comics where I was starting to kind of like, not with millions of other comic book readers at that same time period, where it was like I was going away from the mainstream comic stuff. I was looking more at independent comics, looking more for the first time, like being exposed to British comic book creators and British comics and black and white comics and that kind of stuff, because I certainly grew up Marvel DC, you know, that was all I really read.
You were coming out of your John Byrne phase, and I was
Yeah,
still like
yeah,
knee deep
yeah,
into it,
yeah,
right? You know, I was buying at that
yeah.
point, I was buying back issues of Uncanny X-Men, trying to, you know, get that full Byrne Claremont run. And then I actually kind of warmed to Dave Cockrum, who I didn't really love to begin with. And so, you know, for Kevin O'Neill, for me to have looked at this, you know, in 1987, I would have been like, that doesn't look like John Byrne.
No, it does not. It
No.
certainly does not. Yeah, I mean, I think initially I was probably just attracted to sort of like the cover and the idea of it, and you know, the hyper violence of it, not really suspecting what was, you know, the subversiveness and the political messages and all that other stuff. And I don't
Oh,
even think I didn't get half of that stuff when I read it the first time. Like I didn't
yeah.
understand most of it. You know, I probably picked up stuff this last time reading it again in my
Yeah.
50s. And it was like, oh, he's talking about World War II here, or he's talking about, you know, like just different things
Yeah.
that are in the book, which is fascinating.
Military industrial complex. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And so it's interesting to sort of like go back and see how ahead of its time it really was, and unfortunately sort of like how topical it still is as
That's what's scary about it is I'm reading it now and I'm just like, holy shit, this is relevant. This is relevant now.
yeah.
We're, you know, it's you know, the whole cult of personality, and how the, you know, the government, you know, lying to protect you, and you know, it's I don't want to get too deep before Tom jumps in with us once he gets his children, you know, in the box. But
Silence.
um we'll talk a lot about Pat Mills in the story, but you know, I was introduced to Kevin O'Neill in League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Was, you know, I had probably seen like a Green Lantern comic or something, you know, before that, but that's really where I fell in love with Kevin O'Neill. Is probably, you know, a lot of people did, and he was such the perfect artist for this because so much of that subversive messaging is in the background of his art, and that he is so, that's what made League so amazing, is all of the little stuff that was put into the backgrounds that just kind of creates that world. And this, you know, the signage and the different little, you know, messages that are scrawled on walls and that kind of stuff just really paints the picture of this, you know, really crappy place that they exist in.
Well, it's interesting, and that goes back to what I was saying earlier. That I had listened to an interview with Pat Mills talking about it, and you know, he said essentially how the, you know, it sort of came about was that um Archie Goodwin and
Mm,
you know was working,
the great Archie
and
Goodwin.
he,
Yeah.
the great Archie Goodwin, and he was heading up the Epic Comics, you know,
Hmm.
import or whatever you will, and they were talking to Kevin O'Neill and they wanted him to draw something for Epic. And but Kevin didn't really, you know, for whatever reason, he didn't really vibe with some of the writers or American writers. So
Yeah.
he actually brought Pat Mills in on the project.
And
And
this is what year is this?
this would have been like probably 85, 86, something like that.
So we're
Probably 86.
like 14, 15 years after Pat Mills basically created 2000 AD.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because he had created 2000 AD. He had been written, but they just, I mean, it was just a different world where you didn't have, you know, the British invasion kind of had just started. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so in comics, I should say, and so you didn't have that. You didn't have a lot of those British writers coming over to the U.S. and having success. And even still to this day, I don't know that Kevin O'Neill and Pat Mills, outside of Marshal Law and a few other things, have had a ton of American success for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he was saying though that so he pitched the story, and initially Martial Law was uh the name of the book and the character design was O'Neill. So he had
Hmm.
already had the name of the book. We're going to call it Martial Law. This is the character. And then Pat sort of, you know, quickly put together a premise to pitch to Archie and to Epic of like a kind of, he said it was kind of a straightforward, almost like a cop book, like a, you know,
Mhm.
almost like a murder mystery kind of cop book, crime book, was initially what I was thinking. And then once it got
Eh,
approved, you know, and
yeah.
Archie kind of approved that, and he was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah. Well, that,
Well, then they went back.
Watchmen had come out, and that was kind of a whodunit, weird, superhero.
Yeah,
So
sure,
there was
in a
probably they
way.
were probably saying, "Oh yeah, there's appetite for that," right?
Yeah, I'm sure. And then, you know, but then, Pat talks about like, then I started to think about it, and it was like, well, this is a superhero book, or this is going. I want this to reach people that would read Marvel comics. Like he was looking at it like, I'm not going to try and write a book that's going to be released by Marvel, by Epic, but it's only going to kind of like gear towards like an art house crowd or people that, that already like my work. He's like, how do I kind of get this to have a broader audience?
He
Well,
wanted 16-year-old Brian Salazar reading
that's
this
right,
book.
exactly. He did. And so that's when he had the idea of like, okay, well, what if he's a cop, but he's a cop for superheroes? And he talks about like he kind of despised superheroes. He kind of hated superheroes, and not necessarily like the 60s, 50s and 60s, or like the classic stuff, but like the stuff that was coming out in the 80s, that the extreme superhero stuff. He just fucking hated all that shit. So he's like, okay, we're gonna make him a superhero killer, a cape killer. And that's where that idea came from. But then, like you were talking about, like the graffiti and the world and all that, once he sort of pitched that to Kevin O'Neill just went off, and he's like, well, let's do this and this and this. And he said he really created the world that Marshal Law lived in, and like all the graffiti and the signs and all that stuff. And he's like, that was all Kevin O'Neill. Like,
The sayings on the t-shirts and
all that stuff.
Nuke me slowly,
Right. And it was really fascinating to listen to him talk about, like, this true collaboration on the book, because it is so much of it is the visual look of it, and like the world that they live in, and that kind of thing. And it does, like, I think it borders on not, it doesn't border, it certainly goes over like into a ridiculousness. I mean, there's so much ridiculous, but there's also this weird, like, it's grounded in this sort of weird, dirty satire world, like, that we can kind of see. You know what I mean? Like, you can kind of see
Well, I mean,
that
that was
our
2000
world.
AD, right? What Mega City, right? That was, so this is, I mean, it's not revolutionary for Pat Mills. I think he was taking a lot of the ideas and concepts that were in Judge Dredd in 2000 AD and kind of reworking them for an American audience a little bit more, right?
Yeah, and this is what I started to think about, like, you think about all the comic book creators, the British comic book creators, right? Like, almost all of them that have been successful have this sort of like anarchist sensibility to them. This sort of, I mean, it makes sense. Like in the 80s, the punk rock sort of do it yourself,
Margaret Thatcher, yeah.
But the funny thing is, and I love that. I mean, you know me, you've known me for forever now, and it's like, I love that attitude. Like, I have a very anti-authoritative, rebellious nature in me, and so I vibe with that sort of attitude. I don't think there's enough of that in the world today, really, but those guys were something that I certainly connected with. But the thing that's really interesting to me is, like, I look at it where most of the time the outcome of that, or their target, is generally the US. Even though, like, you look at like 80s England and Margaret Thatcher, and it's like, you live in one of the most fucking like fascist sort of states
Oh,
on the
I mean,
planet. You know
I
what
mean,
I
if
mean?
you're
But
looking the UK in general, what was going on in Northern
yeah,
Ireland at that point with the IRA and the Troubles, and I mean, they had plenty of fucked up shit going on in England and the UK.
but it's always interesting to me, like this sort of like anarchist attitude is always sort of directed at, you know, in comics, it's like directed at superhero comics or directed at you know, Western comics, in the United States or the US government and that kind of thing. And it's like, it just kind of struck me as interesting in that way
Yeah.
of like, when the fuck are you going to point your finger at, you know, how come you assholes aren't pointing your finger at your own goddamn government?
Well, it's
You know,
always
sometimes.
easier to, point the finger at someone else.
Right.
And we are bastards.
Well, sure. But are we any more bastards than the British?
No,
Really? I mean,
no,
not in histories, not in the history of the world. We're not
no,
even
not
close.
even close.
We haven't
Not
even,
even close.
we haven't come close to the shit that they've fucking done.
Yeah,
But,
distant,
Right?
distant second or third.
Hey, there he is. There's
Hey, it's Tom.
What's up? How's it
Tom. You got
going?
those. You tied those children up and put them in a closet finally?
And they're still awake. Everyone's just up.
You look exhausted, Tom.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah.
Welcome to Marshal Law. It sounds like you
Yeah,
needed
yeah.
a little tender love and
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
A little love and
maybe a
understanding.
shucking. Yeah, love
Yeah.
and hatred.
Yeah.
We were just kind of talking about the origin of martial law a bit, and I was talking about Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill and how they kind of maybe pulled a fast one a little bit on Archie Goodwin with the initial pitch of martial law was going to be sort of more of a straight crime comic, and then it turned into this like satire about superheroes and authority and, you know, all sorts of different political things that, you know, that it is today, that maybe Archie wasn't quite expecting initially.
You could do weird shit at Epic, right? That's where Electro Assassin was Epic.
Yeah, there were some. Yeah, no, I don't. I think. Well, and he talked about it, and as everyone does, Pat Mills talked about like the reverence that he had for Archie, because what Archie did was he protected his creative people from the blowback, from that kind of stuff. You know, that if there were complaints, if there were, you know, people above them that were sort of, you know, fighting about it, it rarely ever reached the creatives, and that's why people loved to work for Archie and with Archie.
Have you ever heard anyone say anything but glowing remembrances of Archie Goodwin? I mean, we had way back whenever we talked to John Byrne, it was like, who did you love to work with? And he's like, Archie Goodwin was the best.
For sure.
Beloved.
But the beloved
Beloved.
Beloved.
Yeah.
Beloved.
But so for those that maybe have never read the book before, we can give you I want to give just a brief sort of synopsis maybe of it. And then I really, like I said, I'm really interested in what you guys have to say about this book, because I could talk about it forever, but because neither of you have read it before, and I've read it multiple times, but so I'm really excited to see what you guys think about it. But so for those that have not read it, yeah, it is a book written by Pat Mills, art by Kevin O'Neill. It came out in 1987 from Epic Comics, the Marvel imprint. And it's a story of a guy. What are you doing?
Sorry.
It's a story of an ex superhero, or at least a superpowered soldier, who is now a government sanctioned police officer whose job is to rein in rogue superheroes, because now after this genetic engineering, like, superheroes are everywhere. People have powers, almost everyone has powers, it seems like, and there's a lot of these ex-soldiers who got superpowers to go fight in a war, and now they're home and they really don't know how to deal with the fact that they have these superpowers and aren't in a war any longer. And so they do all sorts of crazy bad shit, and it's this crazy world that is also is set in the fictional city of San Futuro. after like the big earthquake that eventually is going to take out California. It happened in this world, and now they're living in this apocalyptic sort of city. But Marshal Law, there's he's tasked with finding a killer. Someone is running around. A cape is running around. The sleeper man, is running. Sleep man. He's running around killing women that are dressed like Celeste, the superhero, the female Wonder Woman of this world, basically. And all the heroes are essentially like thinly veiled copies of Marvel and DC superheroes. So it's a lot of satire and that kind of thing. And Marshal Law eventually thinks that the number one superhero in the world, the public spirit, is actually the killer in disguise. But I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but yeah, he's trying to expose that guy for his wrongdoings, and the story goes from there. So that's just a brief sort of synopsis.
He's got to get Homelander.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, because reading it again this time around, I'm like, man, I cannot imagine that that book was not inspired in some ways.
Oh, Garth Ennis was reading Marshal Law.
For sure, right? Like there's Yeah, so it's interesting. And I'd like to, at some point, I'd love to talk about if they ever made a Marshal Law TV show, who would we think would be cast? Who would be cast as those characters? But anyway, so what did you guys think about Marshal Law? Your first time reading?
I was gonna say, I don't know if you could do a TV show of it and it'd be quite the same way, because like the Kevin O'Neill art is such a element of like why it kind of works, because when we talked about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, like his style kind of like doesn't sit neatly in any particular thing. Like sometimes it's like it leaves you like kind of like, what kind of story is this all the time? Because you're not quite sure how funny it's supposed to be or how horrifying it's supposed to be. And like, it's always like a little funnier than what you think the scene should be, or it's a little scarier than you think, like in a good way, where it's sort of like, you're not quite able to like hone in on exactly like what's happening in it at any point, which is, I think, what kind of makes it work. Is like it kind of is bouncing around between all of these things that
it does this weird oscillation between like murder mystery and war comic and political satire, and it's bouncing around from all
social
of those
commentary.
It's a lot.
No, but and also it borders on the edge also of like it could easily become ridiculously funny. It is funny at times, but it could really tip over into sort of like silliness, or just so ridiculous you don't take it serious at all. But I think it's balanced really well by like, the grittiness and the serious, at times very serious sort of commentary on things that it has.
Yeah, I mean, there's a guy whose like superpower is that he has a tail.
Well, he's almost a superhero.
He's
almost a superhero.
He's almost.
But it's sort of like if you imagined like this story drawn by somebody who
nearly man
kind of doesn't straddle all those things quite the same way, it wouldn't quite work. It'd be too serious. It would be too serious. It would be too like
silly, or
it wouldn't be. Yeah, it just wouldn't quite like land the way it does, like with him, as one of the creators of it, is like it keeps you sort of unsettled in exactly what it is. I mean, there's like moments where like in the action of it, it isn't a million miles away from what a kid would imagine a fight would look like, like drawing it in a notebook, right? Like there's like where he's like kicking the bad guy in the balls, or like, like it's sort of like, obviously the craftsmanship is of a higher level, but like the spirit of it isn't a million miles away from like that sort of like fantasy horror like level.
Absolutely right. Because I know, there's parts of obviously Kevin O'Neill is an extremely talented artist, but there are parts of it that look very, I don't want to say amateurish,
Yeah.
but almost out of place, like purposefully wrong. You know what I mean? Like there's times where like he'll put a person in a pose that like anatomically doesn't work, or it looks like someone who doesn't know how to draw would draw it, like a kid, like like you said, like it looks like a kid's drawing in some ways, but it's like, well, it's Kevin O'Neill. I know if he wanted it to look like that.
He's doing it purposefully. Before we started recording tonight, we were talking about Jim Rugg, who I think is another artist who is very adept at doing that, because Jim Rugg can draw in any style that you ever want, but he will, like intentionally do things that border on amateurish, or, like the kid who drew with the ballpoint pen in the Notebook, and grew up. That's, and Kevin O'Neill was doing that way before Jim Rugg was, right?
Yeah, I think it is fascinating because I love his art. But there's times when you look at it and it's like, I don't know how to describe it. Like, I don't even really know how, you know what I mean? Like, it's so different than most everything else out there. Do you know, like, is there another Kevin O'Neill type artist? Can you name another artist that's like Kevin O'Neill? I don't know that I can. You know what I mean? Like, it's so unique to him.
I mean, it's interesting too, because within like the issues, it's particularly the action scenes that at times like border on sort of farcical like layout of like anatomy, and like the action is so like, this is where my hero crushes this guy's head into a wall, like that level of sort of like fantasy, right? But then like you'll see a page where he's talking to Kiloton, who's also, and like the layout of the page is within Kiloton, who's huge. So there's like these very like extremely well crafted and like well put together parts mixed with like these sort of very like farce like approaches to like violence or how characters look. And it's all sort of happening within one story, right? And it's sort of like, oh, okay. Like when he's not in his costume, in comparison to like sort of like when he does have his costume on, like his costume is ridiculous. It's a ludicrous costume.
It is amazing. It's amazing in every way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's that in and of itself, you could talk for like 45 minutes about like the costume, right? Like just this ludicrous like leather suit, like S&M. Just just
go get the gimp.
Yeah, just
but then at one point in the book, like there's another character sort of talking about how ridiculous it's his girlfriend doesn't know that
Lynn,
it's Marshall. Lynn doesn't know, and she's writing about his costume. And on one hand, she's making saying the same thing, how ridiculous it is. But then she talks about like the barbed wire on his arm. Is that saying something deeper about like his own punishing himself and like sort of like it's just trying to describe it in different ways, or looking at it from a different. So it is, and that's like one of the more fascinating things about this book to me is that I'm not even sure. I'm not still at this point sure exactly what Pat Mills and Kevin O'Neill are trying to say with this book. You know what I mean? Like Marshal Law is technically, the hero, right? But he's not.
Yeah.
Maybe, but he's not really always. He's not really presented that way all the time.
Yeah.
He's certainly not presented as a flawless hero.
No.
And he's presented as, like his alter ego even questions his morality, and he even makes jokes about like his own sadistic nature and how much he enjoys, kicking the shit out of these superheroes. And so there's not like a nobleness to what he's doing. It's, what I mean?
I don't hate him. Well, maybe I just dislike him. No, I hate him.
Exactly.
But there's also like fundamentally a pointlessness to him. Like the thing that like is interesting about like their approach to superheroes is like all the superheroes, like they're in this place like San Futuro, right? And it's sort of like they're all over there, right? And there's a bunch of them, and they're all surplus. They're surplus superheroes left over from the war, and it's sort of like, sure, we have him to like go and round him up, but it just sort of feels like they've been cordoned off into like their own place, and it's sort of like whatever happens, and it's like, so it's like, it's weird because his character has sort of like the gravitas in a funny way of like the Punisher, or like one of his characters is like, I'm going to clean everything up. But really, when you look at it, like from a wider distance, it's sort of like, oh, okay. Like
it's kind of meaningless. And
it's kind of
futile.
meaningless.
Yeah.
There's all these superheroes and like, they're all killing each other and other ones are killing me. And it's like, and they're not in charge of anything. Like they're not like, there's some superheroes who are important to the world, but then there's all these surplus ones who like, who cares?
Gee,
like they're just a problem.
Could it be talking about the military industrial complex and like homeless veterans? And that's, I mean, it's pretty
certainly.
easy to draw that line, right?
Yeah.
I think going back to World War II, all the veterans coming back from World War II and just being all fucked up and not knowing how to survive in sort of like post-war Americana, and as a country and as a government, a healthcare system having no idea how to care for any of these guys or even what was wrong with them. And that's war after war, and that's been every war since. We still are in the same fucking place with every veteran, group that has come home after a war. Is we still don't know how to take care of these guys. We still don't know what to do with them or how to help them, and they don't know how to deal with civilian life. And it is this constant cycle because of the way we're just always at war. We're just always creating these super soldiers.
You just hope that a few of them don't get the idea to go up into a fucking bell tower with a sniper rifle.
Yeah, you do. Surprisingly, not as many do as. But I mean, but I think that it's even just more of like, the idea that we are, we as a society create this mess in trying to protect our society, and how crazy is that cycle? Like, you know what I mean? Like the idea of, hey, we need to protect the United States, so we're going to create a bunch of super soldiers, but then they're going to come home and create chaos, and now we have to have someone to protect us from that, so we can go out and create another bunch of super soldiers, so we can protect this crazy society. You know what I mean? Like it's this weird cycle that we just caught in and we can't ever get out of. And, because we're so afraid of fucking everything and everyone outside of our own little bubble as a country. It's I
like the section where Marshal Law is getting manipulated by the police chief or whoever he is. And it's like, everyone has their price, and Marshal Law like does kind of back off and doesn't go through with with his gut instincts, because he's like, well, if I'm part of the system for this, it's going to help a lot of people, and then I'll just and then I'll come back and I'll get him after that. And I thought that was an interesting part where it's like, even Marshal Law has his price.
Or like, I don't know, to me, like, so much of it is like, part of the humor to me is that he's not different than the other capes that he's chasing. He just happens to be assigned a different thing, but he also creates chaos. He's also like, like that's part of the pointlessness of like, he's getting manipulated by somebody else who's like essentially like, can we keep this guy busy doing something? and like we can direct him to do whatever things he's doing, right? So like in a way, like I don't know, I found, you know, the fact that it's obviously like inspired by stuff like Watchmen and, you know,
DKR.
Dark Knight, but very in that sense it was very different. It's like a much funnier viewpoint of like actually superhero like is kind of pointless and they're kind of dumb and they're kind of like, you know, easy to manipulate and like all this stuff that I thought was like actually like a much more cynical viewpoint of what superheroes are than sort of like even something like Watchmen, you know, where it was sort of like there's so many of them there, we call them surplus, and they're, you know, like just getting, you know, killed left and right by this other guy who's not that much better than them, but we've like made him convinced that he has some purpose, you know, to like handle this stuff, you know. So I've read a couple issues before. I had not read like all 6 of these together in one shot, and I was sort of like, I was like, this is very different. I liked it a lot. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It does take a little bit for your brain to sort of like adjust to like, oh, like I don't quite know what this story is, because the art is so like not, it doesn't fall into like sort of classic, like this is a superhero story. Even something like The Boys, you know, has a style that's like, yes, those are what superheroes look like, right? Like everything looks kind of like goofy in a not in a bad way, but just sort of like that's what they're doing. They're making all these heroes look like buffoons or like weirdos and like
monstrous
like,
and
monstrous.
strange.
Like none of them are normal. Even the ones that are supposed to be normal aren't normal looking. They're weird. They're like, you know, Celeste, who the sirens who are supposed to be these modified like sexual manipulators, like she looks weird. You know,
she's got
like,
a waist that's like, you know, 2 inches around, like, and giant tits and a little
small
tiny
head.
weird head.
Her head's smaller.
Than her boobs.
Smaller than her bust is one of the is Lindsay. You know, like so even in that sense, even those ones are weird looking and sort of like, I don't know. You look at them long enough, you're kind of like, what's happening? Right?
Yeah, it's, you know, you had talked about how like DKR and Watchmen, so serious that this has those elements, but actually introduces some humor and satire in ways that, you know, we probably hadn't seen up to that point. And I see that as, you know, this has got to be, you know, influential to The Boys. I was, you know, the whole murder mystery aspect. I see a lot of powers in the roots of powers in this book. You know, there's a lot of what I ended up, you know, reading and being some of my favorite comics. It's like, I don't know if those comics are around without Marshal Law. So yeah, it was exciting to read this and go, oh, that's where they got that from.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, that's the other thing too, is like in 6 issues, there's so many fucking ideas. Like there's so many just like crazy wild, and that may only last for a page or two and then it goes on to something else. But it's like, you know, so many things that you could run with and go in other directions and tell completely other stories on just, you know, one idea. Like you said, like the, you know, Nearly Man, the guy who, you know, is
the Nearly Man.
Yeah, he's just like, he just has a tail and like just that alone, like you could do a whole story on just that guy.
There's a big fucking hard sci-fi concept in here. It's like, you know, when did Interstellar come out? It was like 2016, 2015. But that whole concept of, yes, he was gone for 2 years for him, but because of Einstein's, you know, theory and faster than light travel, it was 25 years of the gap. And it was just like, when I saw Interstellar, that like blew my mind. And, you know, you read the whole David Green, you know, books and whatnot, but for them to do that concept in a 1987 comic was just banana pants.
Yeah, there's just, I mean, there's so many wild, crazy things, and like I said, it straddles the line between so many different things. You know, superhero comic, like a Punisher crime kind of thing. You know, revenge. There's a murder mystery we're trying to follow. There's a whole serial killer. You know what I mean? Like it's a serial killer storyline that we're following. There's corruption. There's the whole, you know, social commentary on war. There's, you know, the whole space race thing that he brings into it. I mean, there's so much packed into these 6 issues, but
Yeah.
it's really fascinating. But I wanted to go back, Tom, real quick to something you mentioned about, like, you know, Marshal Law is no different than the rest of these superheroes. It's just he's been given a different purpose. And when you said that, it really struck me as interesting because, you know, I think that's a, like, some themes, or that's a theme in this book, is like, you know, the people that are really pulling the strings, they're just, how do we give these guys purpose? We have these like super incredibly powerful weapons that now we have to deal with. And it's like, well, they had a purpose when they were at war. We gave young men purpose, and that's how we got to them to go to war. Now they're home. Well, what do we do with them? We got to give them a purpose. So it's like, okay, we're going to turn them into superheroes, or we're going to now we're going to take some of them, we're going to turn them into cops that chase down the rogue superheroes that don't have any purpose. Or we're going to, you know, like there's a religious aspect into some of this. There's
Oh God,
all
yeah.
these different, you know what I mean? All these different things. It's like, there's definitely an undertone of like purpose equals control. You know, like if we can give someone a purpose, that means we can control them. And I really didn't see that until you mentioned that. That's a fascinating, you know, sort of undercurrent of this book that I hadn't. And that's what this fucking book, there's so much in this book. It's just, even reading it now, like I said, I picked this up in single issues when it came out, when I was 16 years old, and read it then. And I read it again now, you know, in preparation for this. And it's like, I picked up stuff again at 50 that I didn't pick up when I was 16, and I didn't pick up when I was 25, when I read it a second time. And then maybe when I was 35 or something, when I read it a fourth time, you know? And it's really like one of those books. I knew I loved it when I read it the first time, but I'm kind of like loving it more and more as I get older, and just like seeing how great it really is. And also sort of fascinated with, like, I know people love it, but it's not talked about in the same way of like Watchmen or Dark Knight or those books. And I kind of think it should be.
Yeah. It's it wasn't released by DC, you know. It wasn't so what its distribution was probably way lower than either one of those books. But you know, I bet if you talk to Garth Ennis, if you talk to Brian Bendis, if you talk to, you know, any of those, the creators who's, I don't want to call it derivative, but certainly influenced by this, you know, I bet they would wax poetic about it forever.
Yeah. I think part of it's probably because it doesn't fit quite neatly into, you know, like stylistically something like Watchmen, you know, for being groundbreaking, looks like a
Dave Gibbons
superhero. Looks like a superhero.
Dave Gibbons,
or it lives in that world, right? Like you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, like I recognize that. You know, like Dark Knight lives in that. Like, I mean, obviously Frank Miller's art's fantastic, but it's born of that world, and it almost feels like Kevin O'Neill's isn't quite born of that same world. Like it's like a different, like a way of, you know, like I keep going back to like all of their costumes are dumb. They're just like they're goofy. They're like
they're ridiculous.
They're
also like dirty. They're like dirty. Like they look more like what if somebody ran around in a superhero costume would look like. Like it would be bunched up and it wouldn't fit right. And you wouldn't, like, nobody's in that kind of shape all the time. And like you would look ridiculous. You would look absolutely fucking ridiculous running around in a costume like that.
Yeah. They don't look, they don't look imposing.
It doesn't want to like speak like superhero language the same way that even a Watchman, you know, like when they're in costumes, you know, they make some jokes about, you know, Owlman being kind of fat or, you know, like that stuff. But like, it's still within that language, right? And this feels like a little bit of like, actually, no, we're not going to like even
pretend
like that costumes would look good or cool, or like, like, I mean, it's funny because when you read the book, you get lost a little bit and you forget that Marshal Law's costume is dumb and it's weird. And then there'll be like a full page spread where you're like, oh yeah, that's right. He's got like a leather mask on with like a zipper. Well, he's in a convenience store, like getting food, like it's like, and it's funny because it's like
fear and loathing on his chest.
Like superhero costumes would be dumb. It would be ridiculous and like weird looking, and like it's like walking around dressed in like an S&M costume isn't a million miles away from like superhero leather X-Men outfits.
I wonder if that's really, because this is a book like, we've talked about this in the past. Like you could read Watchmen, and if you want to ignore all the things that it's saying negatively about superheroes, you can't. Like people read that book and they love Rorschach, right? Yeah. And you could read The Dark Knight Returns and walk away with that with a very positive view of Batman.
Yeah.
But you can't read this book and come away with anything other than superheroes are stupid. Like superheroes are dumb.
Yeah.
They're a disease. They are a disease and I am the cure.
There's bacteria. No like surface level like, oh, this is just a cool Batman story, or like, oh, watch it, that's a cool superhero story. I didn't even read the pirate stuff in the back. I just read this, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's not an avenue in this story, like
there's no escaping. There's
no escaping. He like makes these huge panels of this guy in a leather mask. Like you can't ignore it. It's like, he's making it look like it's like ridiculous. Fundamentally ridiculous.
Yeah.
They don't ever let you escape it.
Although I will say, 16-year-old me probably thought Marshal Law was pretty badass.
Oh, sure.
I would. I don't know. I don't know that I walked away from Marshal Law going, oh, that it's ridiculous. Like, no. At 16 in 1987, I was probably like that. He's a badass. He's kicking the shit.
Yeah, you were looking for all leather outfits.
Yeah. I don't think I understood it, but
Like,
another book I was thinking of while we were reading this, and it's very different, but I think also influenced by this would be Top 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All the superhero, everyone has superpowers, kind of a thing. Yeah. I think so. There's a
police story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think all those guys had to some degree been influenced by 2000 AD, right? Like Judge Dredd in 2000 AD, and they all grew up. That was what they grew up reading, really, and so. As you said, Chris, Pat Mills is called the godfather of British comics. And I think, just that sensibility that, he doesn't hide it at all, of his complete fucking disdain for a lot of, Western superhero comics and superhero characters. Like, that's what this book is all about. Like his fucking hatred of that shit and sort of pointing out how fucking ridiculous and silly it can be. Which I'm sure a lot of fans, it's hard for them to sort of face that and sort of look at themselves to some degree, but it's like, anything can be looked at that way. You know what I mean? Like anything people love, you can also find why it's stupid or why it's silly. There's nothing, I don't know that there's anything that is sacred in that sense, but I just think that
I think part of it's like there's like an essential Britishness to it of like I think when you treat things differently when it's imported to you, and you kind of look at it and you think like this kind of stupid, like this thing that,
right,
like that, like when you look at anything, like I always think about, like, have you guys ever read like those those black and white like Captain Britain ones that used to, those stories that used to be like in the, like whatever the weird Marvel collections that they would have, you know, in Britain. Those, you know, those ostensibly are taking part in the Marvel universe, but like they have a totally different point of view of like what superheroes are, and like they are kind of a like a little bit of a joke about. I mean, superheroes are so American, right? They're so like the in that self-seriousness and that sort of like, you know, like even at its most basic, like the sort of like optimism of a Superman, you know, imagine having that imported to you and being like, what is this? Like this weird otherworldly like optimism and sort of like Pollyanna-ish like viewpoint.
Well, it's American,
you know?
it's American, you know, exceptionalism.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's essentially
exactly,
what superheroes are. It's American exceptionalism. And so when that's, you know, it's like, I think it's also a difference in like the culturally nerdy stuff, and not just comics, but you see it all the time in anything. Nerd culture is so protective of the culture, of the things that they love.
Of course.
And yet, you know what I mean? Like they can't, you know, the British can kind of like laugh at something they love. Like they can take the piss out of something, but still love it. And Americans, you know, it's like, I think because we grow up so, at least nerds, we grow up so sort of like afraid that someone's going to find out we like something that they might not approve of. We can't really make fun of it. We have to, it's a sacred cow to us, and we can't
defend it to the end.
Yeah. Where I don't think, I think they don't have that same feeling about something where it's like, no, you know, you can kind of look at something honestly and yet still love it. Like you can say how stupid it is and silly and point, you know, at all the flaws of it, but still love something. And that's okay. But I think we, you know, that's just an American thing too, of like, no, we're the best. And because if you're not the best, you're shit. You know, there's no middle ground. There's there's nothing in between there. But well, I'm glad you guys liked it. Like I said,
loved it. Didn't like it. I loved it.
Yeah, this was one of those like formative comics for me, you know, like this and American Flag and Watchmen and that kind of stuff that just really changed the idea of what comics were for me. And so I was excited to see what you guys thought about it, because I figured you would like it. I mean, it's so smart and funny, and
we should read American Flag next.
Oh boy. Well, that's the problem is like 50, you know, the first
it's like the first the first story arc. It's somewhere. I don't think I've ever read it all the way through. It's an awesome piece of work. I always bottom out around like the 20th issue or something.
Well, I don't know whose pick is next, but you know, whoever's pick it is.
Say Tom, pick American Flag.
The first story arc of American Flags, or whatever that is, the first.
Sure. I love that story. Yeah.
Oh, you don't have to sell me on it. I'll read. I've read it. I've read it all the way through. You know, probably 3 or 4 times in my lifetime.
Whatever the first
story.
I don't think the first. How long is it? I feel like it's not like.
I want to say
thing.
No, I think it's like 3 issues or something. I want to say the first story arc is, but I can't remember exactly.
We'll read around the first 6, whatever.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Whatever.
Yeah. Sounds good. All right, American Flag it is.
Oh, there it is.
Nice.
I was gonna pick something else, and then I just decided to do that.
If you don't have this, it's the I don't know if they called it the omnibus, but it's that hardcover collection. It's awesome. Oh, and signed by Howard Chaykin.
I got my single issue somewhere behind me.
You didn't get a Rick Flag sketch in your signed edition?
No, like he was. Oh, you got a Rick Flag sketch in yours?
I got a Rick Flag sketch.
Yeah, nice. Well, you talked.
It's been a while.
You chatted him up. You were like, "Sir, I love you. You're the best."
It's been a while since
I read you know what? Flag. My meeting with Howard Chaykin was the greatest like meet your hero kind of meeting, because I did definitely go up there super nervous, and because Shankin was one of those guys you kind of always heard stories about. He was kind of
Mhm.
gruff and
Mhm.
not easy to get along with, and so I went up there like very nervous, and handed him my book to sign, and he just wanted to start talking about movies and TV shows,
Yeah.
and I sat there and talked with him for, I don't know, 45 minutes, and just had this amazing fucking conversation with him.
Yeah.
And he was as awesome as anybody could be, in that moment.
One of
I was
those
just
great
like,
stories where your hero is actually awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, American Flag is awesome. I love it.
Cool.
It's about time that I reread the whole thing. So perfect timing.
I was buying original art for a while until it just got, I ran out of space on the walls and it got really expensive. One of the pages I will always regret not buying is that it was one of the art dealers at a C2E2 had the diplomatic immunity page, and it was more than I wanted to spend, but way less than it probably is going for now.
Yeah, right. For sure.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
Will Pfeiffer still is just like, oh, you should have bought that.
You should have bought it.
Yeah, you know how many pages I could say that about if I had any
Right.
money at the time, but
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. Cool.
Well,
there you go.
You bought a book that we had, or you picked a book that we had way too much to talk about because we were going to dive into the DC movie and TV and all that, video games and the whole James Gunn universe. We'll have to save that for next week.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll talk about it next
Yeah.
week. There's some interesting news from James. Well, we do have a couple minutes. So, okay, if there was, say, a Marshal Law, like HBO Max, television series, who would you cast? Let's just like Marshal Law. Who would you cast as Marshal Law? Who would you cast as Celeste? And the what's the main guy's name? Colonel.
Public Spirit.
Public Spirit.
Oh.
And then I don't know, whoever else you'd want to cast in any ideas on?
So like Marshal Law, he's got to be pretty big.
Yeah.
And
I was thinking like what's his name? He's a little old now, but Clive Owen would have been good. As maybe Tom Hardy could do it, I suppose.
I was gonna say, I was like, am I gonna throw out the standard Tom Hardy suggestion?
I think he's
like,
I just don't. He seems so monotone though. Like American Flag has I don't know.
In a weird way, like Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt? No, I don't see that.
he's too white bread, but that's the character. He's kind of like a white bread American boy who went and got completely scarred by war.
Actually, I could almost see Ben Affleck if you just make him play it straight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like don't just play it straight. And you could, because he could just be that kind of dumb, like
How about Ryan Gosling?
Oh, give me 1 second, guys. I gotta run. My kids are. My kids busted in. Okay. I'll see you guys.
We gotta break it. All right, Tom. We'll talk to you later.
See you next week.
Jailbreak.
Have a good one.
Jailbreak.
Hilarious.
That's funny.
There's lots of people. Amy Adams is Celeste. I don't know. It's
Amy Adams, Margot Robbie, Margot Robbie.
Margot Robbie, because Margot Robbie's good in anything, right?
Yeah.
You said Babylon? She Babylon?
Yeah. She's all over Babylon.
Yeah.
She's on fire in Babylon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Babylon.
Good. It's just got raked over the coals.
Listen, here's the thing.
Marketing.
No, I don't know about bad marketing, but I think people have expectations of a movie when you have big stars in it, and it's going to
Mhm.
be like, here, like people are complaining. The biggest complaint I heard about Babylon was like, there's too much going on. And it's like, it's a fucking movie called Babylon.
Yeah.
Like it's literally about like, the chaos of, decadence. Like that's what Babylon suggests,
Yeah.
right? Like the city of Babylon and the fall of Babylon. And this is about the decadence of the 1920s Hollywood. And so yeah, there's a ton of shit going on. It's
I
super
think people
chaotic.
have
It's
trouble paying attention. It's
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, if it's
right.
not 6-second clips on fucking TikTok, people aren't
If
gonna
it's
enjoy
not
it.
something that I'm not going to mention any names, like my wife, who has trouble like just sitting in front of the TV watching a movie without a tablet or a phone or a laptop, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
and it's
can't do
just like
two things at once. Go
no,
go to the theater and see a movie.
yeah,
But I really enjoyed it. I can see it's not for everybody. It's not, it's not the kind of movie for everybody, but I don't know. I mean, it's not a perfect movie. It's a flaw, it has flaws. It's not like I don't think it's the best movie of the year. For me, as someone who one loves movies, two loves the history of Hollywood, and three loves when a director like takes a big swing at shit and
swings for it.
tries.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's all your wheelhouse.
yeah. So for me, it's like I would rather have that. It's way more interesting of a movie than 10 fucking Top Guns. You know what I mean? Like some
Yeah,
fucking mindless pap that just like is redoing another fucking movie and just like pulls at your heartstring nostalgia chords. Okay, great. If that's all you can handle is a fucking movie, then don't go see Babylon. You're not going to enjoy it. But if you actually
yeah,
like, want to be entertained visually in a different way, like actually want to, see someone do something on screen that maybe you haven't seen before, or, have a character do things that you wouldn't expect them to do, or, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, but it's beautiful. It's super long. I mean, it's like it's over 3 hours, but it
yeah.
really didn't, for me, it did not feel like 3 hours. Because it just moves along really quickly, and it is chaotic and insane, but so was like 1920s filmmaking was chaotic
Sure.
and insane. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I really, really enjoyed it.
Well,
I thought
it's on the list. Talking about, it's weird. In that you can love something, and whenever like public opinion turns away from it, it's actually sometimes nice because you feel like you see the brilliance in it, and you kind of want to own that a little bit. And
sure.
like this past week, The Last of Us, the episode 3 is so good and so brilliant, and I was almost sad that I got on my news feed the next morning and there's like 12 stories about how brilliant this episode is, and it's like, no, it's yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
I enjoyed the episode. I thought it was very well
yeah,
done. I thought it's probably like the best representation of a true gay relationship.
yeah,
As far as in far the sense of like,
monogamous,
yeah, just like a regular,
honest relationship.
yeah. But like, and I love the actor. Obviously, what's his name is terrific and everything.
Ron
I
Swanson,
can't think of it. Right, yeah, he's amazing. But the other actor
the guy who played Frank,
yeah, he's shown up in like the last 3 series that I've watched. He's been in, which is just funny. My wife and I were just kind of
Nick
laughing about
Offerman,
like
by the way,
Nick Offerman, but not Nick
yeah,
Offerman, the other guy, the other
yeah,
actor who I should know
yeah,
his name, but I don't know his
the guy
name.
who plays
But
Frank.
like
He's fantastic.
we watched uh Welcome to Chippendales, where he plays the choreographer who helped start the Chippendales dance
Oh,
clubs.
okay.
He plays that guy, and he's fucking amazing. He's probably my favorite character, and he has once again like a truly sincere gay. He was bisexual, but he has a truly sincere, like heartbreaking gay relationship in that show. And then he was in White Lotus, the first season of White
Yes.
Lotus. I haven't watched the second season.
He
And
was
then he's in this, and I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Was he the
Maitre
hotel
d'
manager?
kinda, yeah, he was the hotel manager.
Okay.
And he's awesome, but he's a terrific actor, and it was really good. But I was thinking about it, like, people, like you said, everybody's talking about that episode. It's all anyone's been talking about since it came out. It just, everyone's just, saying how great it was, amazing. It's, people are calling it the best episode of television ever. It's like, okay,
I think it's Emmy worthy, for
But-
consideration. Slow your roll, right?
Yeah.
You're talking to Mr.
But-
Hyperbole Hill here, and I'm just like, slow your roll, folks.
I was just sort of thinking about, I'm like, would anyone care about it if it was a man and a woman?
Oh, I think it would have been emotionally, arresting, and would have been a great story. It's just that there's not. I think it
Would it
it's
have been,
not.
though?
It's. I think it's. Yeah, I think so. If it's the same story with a man and woman, I think it is. I think the story was.
I don't think
enough.
I don't think anyone's talking about it as like
No,
award-winning,
and I don't care
groundbreaking,
about. I don't care about that. But you're asking about quality. I think that you can tell that same story, or a very similar story, with a male and female relationship, and have it still be a quality story. I think that I think it snuck up on people in a zombie show based on a video game, that you have an incredibly poignant monogamous gay relationship with two later middle age and then approaching elderly characters. I think it was the surprise factor that kind of added to that. You don't expect that kind of TV show to have that kind of story, and I think that's why people are just like, whoa.
Right. Yeah. But I'm wondering, like, and this was just me sort of questioning my own, like, thoughts on it. It was like, is it really, really good and an amazing episode of television, or is it just because it was sort of surprising and unexpected and we haven't seen it before?
Yeah. I think yes to all of that. I think it was really good. I think that's why the internet is freaking out, is because we haven't quite seen it, right?
Now, if it was The Walking Dead, how it would have been different is that Frank would have used his sexual manipulation and murdered Bill. After that would have been the Walking Dead scene. That it was like he would have, because even as I was watching it, I was like, I don't know if I trust this guy.
Right? He absolutely
why is he out here?
He used that. He manipulated Bill because he's trying to survive. I think that because he's even like, okay, if we do this, I get to stay for a couple days, right?
Right.
So yeah, that was all there.
But The Walking Dead, he would have killed him. He would have.
Oh yeah, Bill would have been dead. Bill would have been dead.
That would have definitely been the difference between The Last of Us and The Walking Dead. It was a terrific.
That happened in the video game. Bill and Frank are real characters from the video game.
Oh, they are, but there was no. I mean, there was no.
This is like backstory, right? So this is where the TV
show
there
was
gets
no
to do
implicit.
backstory.
It was suggested that they were that they were.
Did you play Last of Us? Have you played Last of Us?
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's a great game.
It's my daughter's favorite video game.
It's
they were characters in it, but they weren't. I mean, it wasn't ever expanded on. That they had a relationship, and Bill was a much different character in the game than he was in the show.
Love Nick Offerman.
I could care less.
Nick Offerman is an amazing survivalist. It's him coming out of the door with the shotgun.
He fucking he builds canoes and shit like as a hobby, so he could probably do most of that shit in real life.
That's why he's perfect for this. And it's like whenever they're in like the arsenal bunker, you're like, Nick Offerman knows what each one of those fucking guns are.
The only thing I was like, Linda Ronstadt? Really? It's the Linda Ronstadt song? Everybody like that? That's what they're fucking connecting on? I don't know about that
They're
one.
gay. They're gay.
Linda Ronstadt.
You know.
Uh,
Yeah, but no, it's good. I love that show. I'm really Pascal is doing, and Anna Torv, who I haven't really seen since Fringe. I didn't even recognize her as Tess until
I was
I was just like, oh shit, that's Anna Torv.
yeah, I love Anna Torv, and I was upset because I'm like, oh, she's not gonna be around long. And
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like when I first saw her, I'm like, because I really like her. Like I
Yeah.
really, really like her. And I'm like, oh, she's not gonna be around fucking long. That sucks. Because I would have loved to have her in the show.
Yeah. So I love that they do some flashback stuff. They even do like the weird de-aging flashback stuff.
Did they? I don't remember.
Well, yeah, because it's like it's Pascal and Anna Torv and Nick Offerman. I mean, they aged them a lot. Pedro Pascal looked like Game of Thrones, what the Crimson Tiger or whatever the hell he was, the Red Scorpion, and it was like
that wasn't that
era
long
Anna
ago.
Torv. Like 10 years ago.
Was it?
It's look at the watch, friend. It's been a while.
10 years goes by fast.
Right? It does. And my dad says life is like a roll of toilet paper. Goes really fast at the end.
Yeah, I bet. I'm not there yet, hopefully. No, it was good. Yeah, it's a great show. Yeah. It's a great, and like I said, I'm certainly not trying to like shit on it because it was I think it was to me the most honest representation of a gay relationship I've ever seen on screen. Like it didn't have, they were just, it was believable. You know what I mean? Like they were two men that fell in love with each other. And
we've had good days and bad days, more good days than bad.
Yeah,
but there's been times where I've wanted to fucking strangle you.
Right. Yeah. And
that's marriage.
That's what I appreciated of it. It was just like, it wasn't, sort of this, there's this overcompensation in storytelling with anything that has to do, once again, going back to like sacred cows and protecting the things we love. And so it's like, oh, well, I'm going to tell a story of my relationship that, whether it's a gay relationship or lesbian relationship, or if it's a racial, thing or whatever it is. And it's like this overcompensation for it because of like, well, this is my only chance, so I'm going to sort of overcompensate and hopefully,
well, and then that's the whole thing. That's the letting agenda get ahead of storytelling, and I was emotionally, rocked by this episode, not because it was pushing this, this ideology or agenda, but because it was this amazing heartfelt story about these two people who loved each other, and you became attached and invested.
You saw their life together.
It's what
like any other relationship.
Good storytelling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I agree. On the other hand, it's like I watched Wakanda Forever, and I apologize. I know it's Black History Month, but that movie is kind of a pile of shit.
Really? I was going to watch it this weekend.
The best part of it to me was well, they're not Atlanteans anymore, but what would be the Atlanteans, Namor and I thought they were actually the best part of it. But yeah, I didn't think, I mean, there's a couple of moments that are, tribute to Chadwick Boseman, and those are, emotional. But the rest of the movie is just like kind of boring. The fight scenes were not great. And then there's this like, just there's good parts to it. The music in it is awesome. And it looks, amazing, but it's just like as a movie, like as a story, it's kind of not really great. I didn't really think it was.
Well, it's one of the things I'm excited. We don't want to talk too much about it because we're going to talk about it next week. But reading, interviews from James Gunn about what they're planning with DC, knowing that Tom King is in the writer's room and that they basically have a 10 movie and TV series outline pretty much scripted out at this point, gives me a lot of hope that that we're going to see some really well told DC stories.
Yeah, that worries me a little bit, though. And we could talk about
Mhm.
this next week a little more, but it worries me in the sense of like, oh, well, we have to have the next decade figured out of what we're going to do. Okay.
Yeah,
but
you
now
can,
are you sort of
yeah,
forcing...
you can handcuff yourself. You can handcuff
Yeah.
yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like, well,
Yeah.
what if it's not good? You know, like, what if you got 10 years of shit then? Like, you know what I
then you
mean?
end
Like,
up with Zack Snyder for a decade.
yeah, exactly. And it's just like, well,
Yeah.
let's hope that it's good if you're going to
We'll
plan it
see,
out that
you know.
far ahead.
And
but
James
we'll
Gunn
see.
is not flawless. He's made movies that I don't think are great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No,
He's made some of
no
my
director,
favorite. Yeah.
no director's flawless. No director is
No.
flawless. You know, there isn't one, but yeah, we'll talk about that next week for sure.
Yeah. All right. Everyone, thank you for listening to our really fun discussion on martial law. Sal, thanks for suggesting that. Check out American Flag. We're gonna read about the first 6 issues. It was they didn't write for the trade back in them days. So
We're gonna
about the
read
first 6
50 issues. We got to read the first 50.
The whole omnibus. So yeah, we'll be talking about American Flag soon. Check out the Patreon at patreon.com/roundcomics. Shoot us an email. Join the comment section during our live streams, all that good stuff. We will be back again next Thursday. In the meantime,
In between time,
we'll be everywhere in
and around comics.
I am the law.
Fear and loathing.